Welcome to another episode of Corporate CPR, where we breathe life back into your organization, projects, and processes, giving you insights to recovery and avoiding corporate mortality events. Today, we'll be talking about how organizations need to get a stronger change discipline. And joining us to contribute to the conversation is Jennifer Ayres. Welcome, Jennifer.
Oh, thank you so much, Anna. It's so nice to be here today with you.
I'm glad you could join us. Can you share a little bit about your background?
Sure. My background is that I started over 20 years ago in my career exploring how best we can help organizations through change. So I started out with Accenture at the time, and I was in their talent and organizational performance group and spent a majority of my time there really focused on how do you unleash the magic or unlock the potential in the workforce through all sorts of strategies around organizational performance. And in particular, change management was one of my key focus areas. And at that time also, I got into executive coaching because a lot of what I realized the work that needed to be done was really on sponsorship and getting leadership alignment in order for these programs to be successful. And at that point, I went to a smaller, after 15 plus years, I went to a smaller organization called North Highland, where I really extended a lot of my work in the culture space and culture shaping and employee engagement and experience. And then I got the itch about 5 years ago to go out and start my own company. Actually, my husband gave me the poke and the prod to go out and try to do my own thing. And I sort of joked that, oh, I think I'm okay. I'm all right. I get my paycheck every 2 weeks, and I'm all right. I'm good here. And I've seen you start your company, and I've seen all the challenges that somebody starting their company can go through. And lo and behold, I started my own company. So I started a company at the time. We had a different name. We're called Senscient now. And sentient means basically it's a term that's built from the word sentient and ascendant. So it's about really helping to elevate the workplace experience, create a more positive workplace experience. So we've been in business now for 5 years, and all of our focus is really around culture shaping, employee engagement, and change management is a huge component of that as well.
Excellent. Well, we're going to take a little bit of a different angle and talk about some actual case studies rather than talking about things more generically. So yeah, would love to start out with maybe an example of where you've been asked to come in an initiative where change just wasn't going very well, and kind of like, let's talk about some of those root causes that you maybe uncovered, and then we can talk about, and then we can go from there.
Sure. I love to do case studies, and I'll probably pull from a few different examples because, as you probably experienced, there's quite a garden variety that you can refer to. So I would say, and I can give some specific examples as we go along, but generally speaking, I'll answer your question or just talk to the point about when change isn't working well. A lot of times when I'm brought into an organization, it's because they are behind on the project timeline, they're over budget, they're overextended with their resources, and they are experiencing a lot of friction, especially at the leadership level, with individuals not being able to make decisions, and there can tend to be a lot of infighting. And typically when I've walked into those situations, I've discovered that change management was not thought of upfront and wasn't actually built into the program early on. And by built into the program early on, there wasn't really a foundation, there wasn't really grounding work on the sponsorship and governance model to ensure that there's clarity on what is the ultimate business outcome and who are some of the key stakeholders that are going to have a role in the outcome, and how do we need to make sure that they're engaged along the process and that their input is provided and it's clear about what their remit is in that process. All too often, you get down the path and you're in the middle of an initiative and you find out that one of the business units wasn't engaged early on, and they will be significantly impacted by this particular project. And now you're bringing them in 3 or 4 months down the line, and they are putting the stop on moving forward, and that can create a lot of extra burn and extra spend that was never expected to occur in the first place. So, in particular, we had a situation not that long ago where there wasn't large mid-sized company in the food industry had a challenge in that they were running into some timeline issues, budget issues, and what they called us in to consider was where were some of the issues that needed to be addressed with their project. And a lot of the issues were, in fact, around taking a step back and having a clear understanding on who actually is impacted with this engagement, and now how do those individuals need to be involved, and what role do they need to play, and what level of influence and decision-making power or authority do they ultimately have as part of this engagement.
Yeah, I find and do you know, I guess before I look at my observations, do you know what from your perspective, what drives organizations maybe not taking that time, or leaving people out of stakeholder analysis and really understanding where all those impacts are?
I think a lot of times there is a business need. There's a critical business need, or there can be a time sensitive business need that arises. And I like to generally assume good intentions with people, but we tend to get wrapped up in our everyday work and everything that we have going on. So if you have a leader that's coming to you and saying, this is an imperative. If the CEO comes to you and says, this is an immediate imperative. You need to make this happen, put a budget together, figure this out. There can be a lot of pressure on the particular leader that's responsible for driving that initiative. So for example, let's say you are experiencing an issue where you need leadership to have a stronger role in integrating more advanced technologies into building out solutions for the marketplace. If that demand comes to you as a leader and you're asked, go figure this out, and there's a time pressure that's imposed upon you, pretty quickly you're scrambling to thinking through, okay, what's the timeline? What are the expectations of me? Who are the vendors I might need to get engaged? And you're putting together a budget, and you're probably thinking high level about who are the individuals that I need to engage and who will be impacted, but you may not be thinking about necessarily what are they going to think about it, and how am I going to be successful in making sure I have their influence, like I'm able to influence them in a positive way, and I have their ownership in this process as well. So my experience has been most of the times people are either really excited and chomping at the bit to get at this initiative, or there's a timeline that's creating an imperative where leaders are quickly putting together the business case, the budget, pushing that through and activating the project, thinking that putting project management in place is, that's the way to go. And that obviously we know you need to have good project management, hands down, but that doesn't always include a thorough investigation of looking down 6 months, 1 year, 2 years from now, and thinking through what the implications are, and therefore what departments should be included upfront in the planning process.
Do you find that, have you seen a case study or example in your experience where that kickoff was, done poorly? And maybe in my head, what I'm thinking poorly is that it was more a presentation of, here's the project, here's what's going to happen, and maybe it doesn't speak to the impact to you or why you care.
Yes, all too often I see that, sadly. I think what happens, there's a great book called Made to Stink. Made to Stick. Oh my gosh. Made to Stink is because if you don't explain the why. And in that book, they talk about simple concepts and how do you break down concepts in a simple way so that people can grasp it. And too often leaders are knowledgeable about a project or an initiative way before anybody that is impacted is aware of it. And we tend to forget what it was like before we knew the information. So then they kick off these projects and say things like, we're going to, replace all of our systems so that we can get our products out to the market faster and return higher shareholder value. It's like, woo, that's exciting. I'm not sure that gets people super motivated versus trying to think about it from the perspective of, why would this matter to the rest of the organization? Why should they care about it? So in other words, I like to really encourage leaders to think about their change narrative and do some real work around that. So what's the context for it? What is the value of doing this work? In other words, if we want to bring products and if we want to accelerate how we're bringing products to the marketplace, is it so that we can meet a desperate need, or is it because we want to? It's not just about because we want to make money fast. There's maybe something out there that they can hook onto that is about, we want to more quickly respond to our customers' needs in a particular space. We want to bring stronger solutions and help them and hear and describe almost like, here's how we're going to help them. So almost taking a little bit of that perspective of what's the customer experience and playing that back in your change narrative so people can understand the work that we're doing has an implication, and here's how it has an implication. Here's how it ties into our overall strategic goals as a company, and here's what it means for me as an individual. So those are all things that are typically left off of kickoff engagements, kickoff plans, and they jive right into, hey, we have these phases. We're going to use the agile method. We'll give you the quick overview, and we're off to the races. So really important to just set context for people, because especially for some of these programs, it's a slog. I mean, it's a grind. You and I have been on these engagements where it's long hours, long days, and you get a pizza party.
Multiple years.
Yeah, like multiple years. You get a pizza party somewhere along the way to say, nice job. And people can be grounded in understanding the value that is being brought to the clients, the customers, the community as a result of this work, the company, and where and how they contribute to it and why that matters.
What do you find it does to resistance when projects don't get kicked off correctly?
A lot of confusion. I think that I've seen, in fact, I do a lot of advising and coaching specifically for change management to program sponsors and leaders. So a lot of times I see that it creates maybe not just ambiguity, but at worst it creates just apathy. People are just, okay, this is just, I've been asked to do this project, so I'm just going to show up and go to this meeting, but I'm only 25, 30% present. And that has a downstream implication, because if they're not really present, then when it comes time to understanding all of the pieces that go into the project, especially if there's requirements gathering and then future testing and those sorts of phases that you typically see on some of these engagements that require system implementation, for example, people have been tuned out from the beginning.
Yeah, I've definitely been on projects where people were, I think we had one client who was for some reason, like they're just, they're usually short staffed, right? So you usually end up doing these initiatives and they don't end up increasing resources, right? So you've got resources doing their BAU and then they're trying to do a project on top of it. And so then, like you said, either they're multitasking or they didn't show up to all the meetings, or they, whatever the case is during the requirement session. And then they get into testing and they're like, well, this is wrong. This is wrong. We never talked about this. And it's
right.
like, well,
right.
think you did.
I think you did.
Was
And you signed off on this too. Wait a minute.
Although I do have, so there is that piece from an engagement perspective, and and those are even people who I would say, like on the projects that I've seen, they really were invested in the outcome. They really did want it to work, and they cared about the project. But I think it's a twofold problem. It's a organization not giving project resources enough time to focus on a project. But the other thing I've kind of seen a trend of late, it's also technology companies. So I guess I'm talking about more tech specific here, not getting a high enough overview before they jump into the weeds, so that people can understand how everything fits together before they really dive into the solution and making decisions. And so sometimes you may not realize that your decision is actually more widespread than you thought it was.
Yeah. And specifically as it relates to tech projects, I think you and I probably, and others on the call that you've interviewed, can appreciate what a true like IT business partner mindset looks like. And so there's a bit of training that has to occur to help individuals that might be from jumping in from a technology group to get some training or awareness or appreciation for business context that's not always in place when projects start.
Yeah. And so what do you do when you come into a situation like this, where you do have people who weren't engaged, or there wasn't a proper kickoff, and now, like you said, the project's behind schedule, whatever the case may be, low adoption? What are some of the action items that you've, can I even give us a story where you've done it to put in place to help kind of overcome that resistance?
Yeah, first of all, I think it was actually appreciated. I think your guest from last week maybe talked, and you were talking more about agile framework and transparency being a big component of successful engagements. I think first and foremost, as leaders, you have to acknowledge when something isn't going right, and when you may have started an engagement and it didn't go the way that you had hoped, and letting people on the engagement know, hey, we're resetting here. We understand we've learned some things so far, and through those findings, we've understood that we need to collect some more data and bring some more perspective into this plan. And we're going to communicate to you what we've learned. So in one of the examples I had, they were pretty far along into the requirements collection phase, and were running significantly. They were running into a lot of conflicts. And part of the reason for the conflicts is individuals that were being asked to provide comments and to sign off on requirements didn't feel comfortable, because they felt like they needed to get additional input from other business units or functions that they didn't have visibility to, or it was not their piece of the puzzle to solve. They didn't feel like it was their piece of the puzzle to solve for, and they needed some other additional input. So we kind of put a pause on the requirements gathering processes, and we said, okay, for the next couple of weeks, we're actually going to do a more thorough stakeholder sweep to understand, based on, we sort of used it as a positive, like, hey, this is what we've learned so far in the requirements collection process, and we know that we're delayed on our timeline, a little bit delayed on our timeline. We want to take the time now for the next 2 weeks to go make sure we've done a thorough sweep of our stakeholders. We've heard from you that some other folks need to be engaged that aren't here. We want to understand why. And so we did a process by which we did a more intentional stakeholder analysis, which really was, I would argue, not done or haphazardly done in the beginning, to sweep in additional inputs that would help not only bring some stronger insights and perspectives as to the downstream, upstream implications, but it also gave some of these individuals a level of comfort that so and so was consulted. We had, okay, good, we got the right input, we can move on. So we collected all of the individual stakeholders that we thought needed to be involved. And then we regrouped as a project, and we said, here's where we are. We've updated our timeline now. This is how we're moving forward. Here are some of the key individuals that we are going to bring into this process. And we gave them acknowledgement for calling to our attention that there were some gaps that needed to be addressed. So I think that, I guess maybe I'd distill it down to, if you're in a situation where things are not going to plan, you get the outside help you need, or outside perspective you need, or figure out how you're going to get the help you need. Then be transparent, let people know what you've learned and what's going on, because we're not stupid. We know what's going on. And if you don't tell us what's going on, we're going to make things up and spread rumors, and it's going to be a pain to put that genie back in the bottle later. So be transparent, and then make sure that you acknowledge the feedback that you've been hearing, and let people know that you're going to set a new direction, and what are the parameters for the new direction that you're going to set.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about kind of those naysayers, and how important is it to keep them close to the project, I guess.
Oh, my favorite group of people. So, a couple things about naysayers. I think a lot of times people tend to react negatively to change because they don't understand it, and they don't feel heard, and they don't understand what it means for them. So in the beginning of an engagement, or any time in the engagement, if there are naysayers, there are individuals that are naysayers that are probably always going to be a little bit negative. And provided that you aren't dealing with somebody that has a lot of influence or is significantly impacted, that may be need to be managed in one way. But if you have somebody who has significant influence, either among their peers or with leadership, or is being significantly impacted, that's an active relationship that you have to manage. And the more time that you can spend with that individual early on in the engagement to understand, to really get to know them. What are they goaled for? What do they worry about in running their business? What are the things that they expect out of this program? What have they heard about this program? All too often, the naysayers at the leadership level are individuals that feel that they've not been included in conversation about the project and what the project objectives are. They are not clear about how the project is going to impact them and their ability to deliver to leadership what they are committed to deliver. And nobody's really spent the time to work with them and the other leaders to get aligned on understanding how ultimately the business objective and end state is going to impact them as a group. So I would say you got to spend a little time loving those naysayers if they're in a very influential role.
They're the hardest ones to love.
They're the hardest ones to love. Yes.
Do we put enough attention on psychological, and the psychological change and impacts of these projects, or how do you see that piece coming in to play on projects?
That's a great point. We don't spend a lot of time there. We quickly tend to work on the concrete, the things we can see. It's harder to work on the things we can't see. And empathy and curiosity and those qualities are imperative for an individual who's in a leadership position leading change to exercise. Got to exercise those muscles. So all too often we are, we need to help educate leaders that are in positions to drive or lead change, that curiosity is important, um, to understand what's going on, to ask questions, because a lot of people just make decisions based on assumptions and they don't ask probing questions. We like to help leaders in those positions understand and hone in on their empathy skills. So what does it feel like to imagine yourself in this individual's position? What do you know about them? What do you know about what they have to do every day? And why does that matter? We like to talk about psychological safety. A lot of people get afraid of change. It's a normal, natural response mechanisms from human beings. We are not wired to want to change. So giving people a sense of safety in that they have a place they can go to express their concerns, to bring their questions, is huge when you're going through any kind of change program. These are all qualities that definitely need to be nurtured and taught and coached to leaders that are in change leadership positions, because if that doesn't happen, the project may go along, and what gets sticky is that individuals start to distrust the leadership and therefore won't share things or share important critical information that can have a significant business impact later. And we saw this happen on one of my a project of mine early on in my career. We discovered this too late, and the company suffered by spending millions of dollars in legal fees because of information that individuals withheld from the leadership team, and that could have been averted. But when later it was discovered why this information didn't come forward, it was because they didn't trust the individuals leading the program with the information. They thought that if they shared that information, it would basically get them fired or get them in trouble. So it's not a situation that you want somebody to be in. So, or you don't want to be in that position as a company. There's real cost associated with not taking the time to nurture the culture while you're also helping lead the change.
That's interesting. Yeah, we had an example where it might have been a little different, but ended up uncovering a BAU error going on, like that was resulted in incorrect pay. And the project is what ended up discovering it. And then, again, making sure that the culture is good, that like, hey, this has to be shared, like this has to be fixed. We can't cover it up. And luckily all the team did the right thing at the time. But yeah, it can be pretty significant what you can find in projects.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. It's like, oh my gosh, why didn't anyone bring this to me? Thank you so much.
Well, that's an interesting, actually, thought as well around communication. I mean, how do you, because I do find that a lot of times people don't think to tell, us as project managers or change managers, what we're like, oh, this is really relevant information. Why didn't you tell me this yet? And they may not we had a payroll project where we were changing the way people got paid. And because of it was in another country, and because of the complex laws there, it actually meant that people's pay was going to be, it's going to feel like, basically it was going to feel like they were being shorted. And in the end, they really aren't, because it evens out over the time. But when you're talking about people who aren't highly paid, feeling shorted up front is a really big deal. And so we found this out, 2 months before the first go live was supposed to be. Luckily, there's other issues and go live got pushed out. But how do you foster?
You could sweep that one under the rug.
Yeah, we had time to fix it, right? How do you get people to understand what's relevant and not relevant, and get that communication going so that the change can be more effective?
Well, that's a great question. So I think one of the most important steps that you can take in the project process is to facilitate something called a change impact workshop, or conduct a change impact assessment. And the reason why that's important is, yes, communications is important. And please, please, please make sure that you have somebody that knows how to write communications. It is not sufficient to pull someone out of the business who doesn't have a lot going on and just expect them to know how to actually write good communications. Actually, I loved the sidebar. I loved the interview that you did with one of the gentlemen. I'm trying to remember his name, where he talked about how to sell in a remote world. I think that was the topic. And writing was such a critical skill set that we're often not trained to do. So getting the message across is one thing. Finding the relevant message is another process. And we typically find that when we do a change impact assessment or change impact workshop, where we actually bring various business leaders together, or not even just business leaders, but individuals that may be 2 or 3 steps down that are closer to the work. And we run through different scenarios in the future state vision, either with or without the technology, to uncover more of the implications between the as is and the to be. And that really can produce a rich source of information that can help you then be very targeted to specific stakeholder groups about what's changing, why it's changing, how it's changing. And then it's not sufficient just to send out. I remember one of our clients thought I found this out later, that they sent out a communication to their field, which are a bunch of technicians that are out driving trucks all day long, about changes in their pay, which, by the way, these technicians typically don't get their communications via email. And so needless to say that majority of them didn't know about the change and were really upset when they found out. So it's a really important step to make sure you understand the different channels by which people receive information. Different communities within an organization receive messages differently. Email is certainly one obvious way, but there are different subcultures in companies too. So understanding all of the channels that are available to you. Sometimes town halls work, sometimes doing webcasts. I know actually some companies we work with now, we do internal podcasts as a way to get project information out. So there are multiple ways to consider getting messages to people that are relevant, but understanding and doing the work about what's changing, why it's changing, and how it's changing is really important as a first step before you even communicate and in through any of those channels.
Well, so I guess along those lines as well, so I've said this on my show many times. I'm not a change manager. I'm one of those people who, I told you once, why don't you know this already? Or I really related to what you were saying about the executive, where you've known something for a long time. So of course, the next step for you is not a big step, but it could be a big step for the person who just has first heard about this. So I am that person. Because of that, I do surround myself with change managers.
Well, that's good. I'm glad we met.
Yeah, I do know that I need change management. So I very much value it. And I don't think companies put a lot of, I don't think they put enough money in there. That's usually the first line item to get cut, followed by project management. And then that's why projects fail. So, but my question is, so on some of the projects that I've been a part of, communication is really difficult, right? Because people get tons of emails, so they don't read email, and then you have the training sessions that they don't have time to attend, and you have all of these things. So how do you really get effective? What is a strategy to actually get effective communication? And I've even heard you have to have 8 touch points to really be able to get the message across. So how do you do it without it becoming just noise?
It's a really good question. I think that in change programs, you have to think about change programs holistically. Too
Mm,
often, individuals think of change management as training and communications, and that if that's the only thing you do, you're not going to be successful. There really has to be a holistic approach on understanding what are the different ways that you can access people and what are the different ways that you can get them involved. Because if you have a community that's impacted and you understand how they're being impacted, there are other ways besides some of the more traditional communication routes to access those. And some of that can be through building intentional communities to disseminate information. You probably have heard of engagement networks or business
mm,
change agents, etc. And those individuals, if you have an opportunity to be intentional about how you structure those, you can actually find individuals that are up and comers in the business that you want to give a leadership opportunity to and ask them to be a participant in a group that is a change agent network, for example, or an engagement network. Use them as a sounding board to collect feedback and also to go get information and bring information to you as well as disseminate information. And that can be a very rich way to continue to get information out more broadly as a reinforcement, for example, to your emails, your town halls, the training that's going on, etc. As well as get feedback back that's telling you where are there some gaps, where are you seeing some disconnects, how do you need to shore up areas where people are don't seem to be moving forward and making progress. Those are just a couple of off the top of the head thoughts that you could
mm.
consider deploying.
Yeah, it's I've seen, we always have the projects that have had change management have had change champions, which is kind of I think what you're talking about, change, like the engagement people. But I've actually never seen them where they've actually taken hold of that and really run with it. And I'm kind of wondering if it's a lack of understanding. So when you set up these, these change teams or that are out in the business, how do you make sure they understand what their remit is, what they should be doing?
Yeah. It's important to structure these in a way that individuals understand their role up front
Mm,
and that it's very visible to the leaders. So, for example, if you're going to put this team together, I would make sure that the sponsor of the program or someone very senior in the organization is acknowledging that this is an important group and that a lot of the success is dependent on some of the inputs that we can get from this group and some of the work that this group can do in helping to prepare others in the organization. And you create that sense of community, but you also create that sense of this is an important role. There, it has to be given the level of clout and credibility at the leadership level for it to work. If it's just sort of this add-on bolt-on thing, it doesn't really get a lot of traction because everybody has a
mm,
day job. Why am I going to
yeah.
care about doing this thing for the project when my boss is yelling at me for this? Well, if it's your boss's boss's boss that's acknowledging that you're doing this work, it has a much more relevant implication in how you might be engaging with the project. The other piece is so making sure that it's visible to the leaders, that these individuals have been selected and they're visible to the leaders. Making sure that they're also getting appreciated and recognized for the information that they may be bringing back to you, or that the feedback you're hearing that people are getting some of this information. Having regular touch points and making sure that you're meeting with them regularly. These are also individuals that can basically help serve in the role of first line of defense,
Mm,
or not first line of defense, but as part of your stabilization room or situation room, go live room, war room, whatever you want to call it. These are folks that also can be useful in building out your support model structure.
yeah, absolutely. Well, Jennifer, we've kind of run out of time, but it's been a great conversation. What are the 3 things you want to leave top of mind for the audience?
I think the 3 things top of mind are, as a leader, if you are responsible for moving an organization through change, please take a moment to reflect that maybe all of the great information that you know and the great reasons that you know about why we're doing this isn't going to necessarily resonate right away with those individuals that you want to follow and you want to influence. So taking a moment to think about what it was like before you knew any information so
Mhm.
that you can help frame the why for people can be really important. And if you haven't read the book Made to Stick, not Made to Stink, consider doing it because there's some
Mhm.
great tips in there on how to do that. The second is that it takes a lot of work to move people through change. The easy thing is to budget for the other nits and bits, the technology, the resources, etc. It's another thing to really budget for and think about people's emotional impact as they go through change and some of the resistant barriers that will inevitably be put up. And there is a cost associated with addressing it, and there's a bigger cost associated with not addressing it. So
Mhm.
I can guarantee you, over my 25 years of doing this, companies that have not implemented any kind of change in their programs spend more at the end of the day in productivity loss and budget overspend and budget overrun than companies that do. And if you want to go look at stats, you can go out on ProSci's website. There are more stats out there than you would care to even imagine about programs that have not budgeted for change management. And I think the third is assume positive intent from people going into these programs. People aren't just out to get you because it's your agenda and they think it's stupid. There's
Mm.
probably a reason why they might be resisting change, and we need to discover that. So stay curious, stay open, and hire a good change leader.
Well, thanks so much, Jennifer. And what are some ways that folks can get in contact with you or learn more about what you do?
So sure. Thank you for asking. You can go to our website, sentientglobal.com, or you can email us at hello@sentientglobal.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. So
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
thank you. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure meeting you. I look forward to working with you now in the future, now that we've met, because
Yeah.
I need some good project management help where I'm going, girl. So
Excellent. Well, and to
thank
our audience, until next time, keep your organizations healthy.
Hey!